welcome to Fad or Future. I think we're actually on episode 13, believe it or not.
13, and it's spring.
And it's spring. It is very much spring in Florida out there. It's very hot and toasty.
Well, officially March 20th, but we're very close.
Close enough.
Yeah, 4 days.
Close enough. Weather doesn't care at this point. So, that being said, we do have a lot of topics to talk about today, don't we?
We actually had to narrow our list down, so where sometimes we might struggle a little bit to find topics. I think we came across a few easily.
Yeah.
And we got some good ones.
We do. We definitely do.
Number one, we're going to talk about federal regulation of tech companies. That's our number one topic.
Yay! Regulation.
Number two, more regulation. Talk about regulation of the internet by government.
Yay, more regulation.
And then number three, we're actually going to follow up on something we touched on last month in terms of how online meetings are changing.
Yay, not regulation.
That's our fun topic. So if you can hang in for that and let us get through all this fun
Yes,
regulation stuff.
It's important, though. That is why we talk about it.
Yes, because we want you to know.
Yes.
So let's start with number one. Federal regulation of technology companies. Now this comes from Microsoft, right?
Yes. So this actually transpired not that long ago, and it was kind of a surprise to all of us, especially given the fact that we had just kind of gone through a whole major compromise by a potential nation state with the SolarWinds attack. And so we actually had that instance where there was a major compromise, no one was aware of it, and once it was found out and kind of divulged, it was discovered to have been going on for quite some time. And so this instance that occurred, we actually had Microsoft came and announced that they had a known vulnerability within their Exchange environment that was impacted by all Exchange platforms that I was aware of.
Right.
As well as the fact that it had been patched previously. It had been included in a previous patch in 2020. And that if you were on any of their online platforms, such as Office 365, Microsoft 365, you were already patched.
Correct.
So they basically did it in a very secure way, saying that if you've been following the best practices or on our online services, you're already protected, but this major thing happened.
Right, and just to kind of timeline this a little bit. So you had the SolarWinds Orion incident with Microsoft data centers last year. Again, that triggered Congress to get involved and kind of ask, how did this happen, what happened? And that was particular to Microsoft data centers, and again, a specific product from a third party, not Microsoft, but it was, again, Microsoft data centers involved. But now it's an actual Microsoft product, and there was a nation state attack, and again, this all just happened last week. But like you said, it was known, and this commonly happens with 0-day, right? I mean, usually a 0-day, when it comes out, it's not often a case of mass panic, but just again, it's a priority awareness situation, right? Because there's usually a chance for the vendor to respond before the 0-day is exploited.
As long as everything goes according to plan, because usually whoever finds the vulnerability will inform and give some form of deadline. Usually the ones that stick out into our brain, though, are the ones where the deadline was not either met or there was some conflict of communication. WannaCry.
Right. Yeah, WannaCry was a virus. Yeah.
WannaCry was one of the biggest ones where that was a problem with Intel. Intel wouldn't actually they didn't want to divulge it, and so other people did. This is kind of more, like you're saying, how this is supposed to go. A vulnerability is found, it's already addressed before it's announced.
But now, again, a lot of people don't pay attention to patching. If you don't have somebody helping monitor, take care of that, hint, hint, that can happen. And in this case, that's really what the nation-state attacks were doing. We're looking for these unpatched systems and exploiting it. But of course, Microsoft, this is what leads us kind of to our topic. Microsoft had to go speak about this, and they made this comment that was reported by Simplicity.org, one of our blogs that we follow, where they commented about regulating them, telling the government, hey, maybe you should regulate us. And that's kind of our fad or future, this idea that with nation-state attacks and cybercrime being the new front, if you will, for political movements or countries that want to, seek actions against other countries. Is there a reality, a fad or future, where the government's going to regulate technology companies?
And where government is going to need to get in. I mean, this is almost, the scope is getting too big at that point. When you start to question, it becomes kind of a challenge at that point. Whose responsibility is to address these kinds of issues, and what does that address look like?
Right.
I mean, when you're not just saying, okay, there's malicious bad actors out there, a few hackers that found a vulnerability and found a way to make a quick buck. When that no longer becomes the intent, like what does the conversation? And I think that's really what Microsoft was trying to say. Far be it from me to assume what Microsoft was trying to say in anything.
And we could spend a long time on this conversation
Yeah.
because you could look at it from so many different facets in terms of we've seen things like HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley where the government regulates aspects of technology on how transactions are done or how things should be protected. But the idea of regulating the companies, that's something that generally speaking is frowned upon.
Yeah. And so this really kind of does lead us to, do we think this is a fad or a future? I mean, it's a really hard one, and I think that we started with probably the hardest one to choose.
We did.
Well, what do you think? Which one do you think it is?
There's a part of me that believes this needs to be the future. If we had that whole discussion of what the modern, what the future looks like in terms of modern warfare, it's clear the government's going to have to constantly maintain a strong presence to control technology and how technology is exploited to, either impact the country or government economically or in their power infrastructure or whatever it might be. So I think there's a longer term picture, but I certainly would say in terms of what we've seen in the recent history, it's got to be a fad. I think it's just a fad that the government's too monolithic, too slow, too incapable of regulating technology.
Well, and I think you touched on it exactly. That's what I was actually going to say to a degree.
Yeah.
Is just the fact that, we're going to actually be talking about it in a moment, but the whole idea of like net neutrality, like that was a very long-standing concept that was derived out of phone systems. That is something that, it has taken a long while for the government to actually kind of get their head around, and they're still doing it to one argument, right? If we're having these quick evolutions of compromises or threats, that's not something that can be addressed in a 5, 10, even 20-year span.
Right.
That's something that needs to be addressed then and now.
Right.
And so the flexibility, that's what I'm saying is that I think it too is a fad. I think this is just them acknowledging this future, this potential fact is going to be there, and just trying to throw out an idea.
Well, and you could imagine Microsoft is maybe even mocking the government by saying it, right? Regulate us because we know you can't. So,
it's a quick and easy way to pass the buck a little bit. Or
right.
Who knows? But
that does lead into topic 2. So
yes.
On topic 2, we want to touch on the regulation of the internet, right? Certain countries are, countries, like China, for instance, and so there are some other examples where the internet's fairly regulated. We are now in this new political era where net neutrality is a continuing discussion, and I think there was some recent news from a state that you wanted to mention.
There's a few of them. Really, first and foremost, it's definitely California.
Okay.
So California.
Should we tell people what net neutrality is real quick before we jump into that?
That's probably a good idea.
I just realized that. We probably want to make sure everybody's following along at home.
Okay,
Or in your office.
so net neutrality at its heart, and that's where I was kind of inferring to a moment ago from the origination from the telephone systems, is just the idea that a service is a service. The access to a phone system, the access to the internet, is just the access to the internet. There's no variation between how you're accessing the internet, or what resources you're accessing. A lot of ways that people will equate to it is that it's roads on a highway.
Okay.
Right? There's no fast lane, no slow lane. They're just all roads on a highway. And if you want to get to a place, it doesn't matter where you're going, the roads have to take you there, right?
Okay.
And this has kind of evolved into a conversation of, prioritization. There's been a lot of arguments from a lot of different people and organizations saying, no, we should make a fast lane or a slow lane. And there's been a lot of pushback on that.
Okay, so keeping it simple, then net neutrality is this idea that the internet should just be equal for everybody, equal access to all the roads, versus that idea of a high speed lane and people paying that premium. And we're not talking about internet speeds because that already happens. I can pay more money for a higher plan, but you're talking about actual access to maybe a service, like you want to get the Netflix and you have to pay an extra fee per month to get the Netflix.
Right, and it's more focused. Net neutrality is more focused on the receiving end than so much the incoming end. It's not so much with users in the way that I see it, because it's not so much, I need to pay this much to get an internet service, but it's more on the providers that are providing the services, the Googles, the Netflixes of the world,
Okay.
that are more focused on where are my subscribers coming in? Where are my users coming in from?
Okay, so instead of just paying for a larger pipe to support millions of people, but also paying just that ability to access the people because a provider, an ISP, an internet service provider, controls that network.
Right, and that's the whole conversation of this again, net neutrality, it being neutral, right? Where if if you are Netflix, or if you're two guys that are creating a Netflix,
We're probably losing viewers like constantly. Like people watching and saying, "This is way too deep for me."
Right. Well, and it's a hard topic, and that's why is that the competitors of Netflix could have the same experience. If a user was connecting to either one of those, they'd have the same experience. And if we don't have net neutrality, there's a concern that they might not have the same experience, and that might mean that there's not going to be competitors, or it's not as easy to be a competitor.
Right.
And so that's where just again at the end of the day, a lot of argument is that this is the openness and the equality of the internet as it has always been, more or less so far. We want to maintain that.
And so California has passed net neutrality as well. So that's the big news.
Yeah. So California basically took matters into their own hands after this has been a discussion on the federal level for a while to say, well, we want net neutrality to exist, to be the case, and so we're going to start putting measures into our place that is going to force that law. Well, this is what's really interesting is that we're seeing a lot of, this is not just, the Chinas of the world saying we want to control the internet, we want to control the information. These are other smaller either countries or even states taking the matters into their own hands and starting to say, well, what do we think the internet should be like in our realm?
Okay, but I'm going to pause you there because everyone knows California kind of does their own thing. Right. You've got Silicon Valley, you've got all the things out of California, right? So, is it really necessarily setting a trend that just because California did something?
Well, I think no, but I think the fact, and that's in rapid succession, this year alone, it's barely started into this year, but we had, Facebook had their whole news event with Australia, where if you go onto Facebook in Australia, you cannot see news articles. That was a whole conversation and a whole argument of management, and Facebook had requirements and such. They didn't want to, and so the internet has changed in Australia because of it, how the internet is experienced. Then not long ago, South Dakota had a law that they were trying to bring into discussion about the app stores and what the app stores would be like. I'm sorry, North Dakota.
Okay, it's okay. I said South Carolina, so I don't know. We're just going around.
We're getting confused on all the states, but they basically brought into the conversation this idea that, well, how do we say what the App Store experience is? And
right.
The App Store is, arguably the gateway to the internet for a lot of people with their mobile devices and with their iPhones and with their Android phones.
Okay, so it's not we have two states now that have talked about, and so then the question is fat or future that we're getting in a state regulation of internet services.
Well, I think what's really breaking it down is that this is a clear sign of if there's not that overarching conversation and that strong decision on top federal level, that states are willing to take it into their own hands. I think that's very clearly being stated. And the question is that going to be good or bad for everybody else? Does that mean that when I cross the state line, my phone gets a different internet? And that's going to be a big problem. I think it's the future, though, unless we see some serious change in how all this conversation is going on.
It's a big statement about it being the future, but I think if we were to say, like, if we're in the future 5-10 years, we'd look back and say this was the brush fire that started the forest fire, right?
Yeah.
These kind of topics, whether it's the battle with the Apple Store between Epic and them, these examples that we've just given today. That there's this kind of idea that this marketplace that we use the internet for and leverage it for is going to change, and people will continue to find ways to monetize it and control it.
And change in a big way. I think this is just a lot of this, and we've talked about a lot of other serious topics on this show sometimes, and they're all kind of just, we are seeing a lot of these serious topics like never before, and I think that's all just impetus that something is going to have to give one way or the other.
All right, well, you're going to go future. I will lock in at fad just because I think there's going to be something big that comes along that makes this like not the conversation piece, but I don't know what that is yet. So I'm going to keep that in mind, though, and maybe in the future we'll talk about
2021 is still early.
That's right. It's still early. Surprises yet to come. So number 3, Microsoft release something that kind of ties into, we were talking last month about avatars in the meeting. So
Yes.
we had put that discussion on there about that whole cool thing you could do on Zoom. And you want to tell our audience about the new feature coming out from Microsoft?
I can't lie. I mean, I never thought we'd have a conversation where we talked about something fat or future-esque and then have such a quick reinforcement of our choices right then and there. It's like, I swear Microsoft was like, well, Infotech talked about it.
And I believe we both said future last time. So
we did. We did.
We felt
So,
that avatar meetings and online were the future, and now Microsoft has announced.
So it's called Microsoft Mesh. And so they basically made a press release of it, a big presentation, and it was kind of wild. The idea basically behind Microsoft Mesh is a virtual workplace, a virtual conference, if you will. But it doesn't have to be a traditional conference, like everyone's sitting at a table. It can be wherever you want it to be. And it basically ties in a lot of technology that Microsoft's been working on and pulling it all together. So their work in Windows 10, supporting the infrastructure, their work in the VR space with their Microsoft headsets for virtual reality.
Yeah.
And then their HoloLens, which is their AR project for augmented reality, right?
Okay.
And so this is actually tying all that in so that feasibly you could be in a physical workspace. Like I think one of the ones that they love to show is like in a garage, right? In a workman's garage, maybe replacing a component in a car or a motorcycle or something. And you can actually have the physical motorcycle right there, but layered on top of that, you have the different pieces of the motorcycle and what you need to replace. And then at the same time, you have people around you all analyzing or assessing the same thing.
And the people may or may not be there.
And they may or may not be there, and that's kind of the crazy thing.
Right, this kind of mix of physical presence with virtual meeting.
Right, and I think you actually mentioned earlier that they were saying that like the person's presence can be either cartoonish, it can either be an avatar, if you will, or I mean, hey, a smiling, sad baby kitten, if you want it to be.
Sure.
Or it could actually be a representation of that person. But fact of the matter is that person's not there. They're being represented by an avatar. And they're participating in the real world experience that the other people
I am not buying any airline stocks with these kind of technologies. Why travel now?
Well, I mean, I'm sure they're going to be very interested to see where that goes because business travel is like obviously
it's a huge part in with this kind of technology.
Well, and now that being said, I did hear one anecdote on one of the podcasts I listened to. Where they were talking about this from Windows Central, actually. Well, got to give credit to them.
Okay, all right. We'll link them in the notes below.
Yeah, they were talking about specifically the experience in preparing for this presentation. And he was a little tongue-in-cheek talking about how they had sent him an entire kit, like a laptop and the headset and the other headset. And so he was saying, like, it took him a while to set everything up to be ready for this 1 hour meeting. And so I think that's really going to be like, wow, that technology is just very on the edge, but they're seeing where Microsoft's focus is.
Yeah.
This is where they're going. They just got to get the technology there. And they've already got the pieces in place. They just got to start pulling it all together and making it so it's a 5-minute setup before you're
So our fatter future is augmented reality virtual meetings, fatter future?
I think that is such a future. Yeah. I think, and I'm honestly excited. I think that's going to making the engagement just that much more, especially when people are starting to look past the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So we're looking, okay, do we keep, I'm sure these big companies are starting to ask, do we keep the remote workplace? Do we walk it back? Do we have somewhere in between? And this might be something that just out of necessity, having that middle ground.
I think the pandemic has definitely accelerated things, but I'm also a big sci-fi fan. I think if you look back at sci-fi the last 30 years, you saw a lot of these examples of virtual meetings that we're seeing now become reality. Yeah. And I agree with you. I think it's the future for sure. And I think that it's exciting to see in this idea that you can create new ways to connect. So while travel's great, and travel will probably still happen, if I can open that kind of way to connect in a more meaningful way with people without the travel, I'm going to open up more connections. And that's really what spurs innovation, that's what spurs new business, that's what spurs a lot of growth. And that's a pretty exciting opportunity, and Microsoft's got a pretty cool product with Mesh.
And I think it's cool that like to appreciate the real world applications for places beyond our industry. Like sometimes we just get focused in tech, and it's like, well, we all stare at screens anyway. We're just For us, screen sharing is the way of collaborating with people, but
Right.
there is a whole wide world of people that, nope, I need to show them this part. I need to show them this environment, this farm, whatever.
Right, exactly.
So,
Awesome. All right. Well, that was a pretty heavy list of topics today. So we're both kind of seeing the reality in terms of regulation and feeling a little bit different about that. But the fact of the matter is we both believe meetings are going to continue to evolve and agree with the future with mesh.
yeah, I'm very excited. Can't wait.
Well, we'll link the videos and topics we covered today below so you can get information on it on your own and research it. I know it's pretty heavy stuff, but we really think it's good stuff to share and think about. So even if you don't quite know what we talked about and it's a little confusing, be aware of it. And we'll be happy to answer any questions you post in your comments below. Please like or subscribe, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time for our episode of Fad and Future.